Hey guys, Jake Carlson here, host of the Modern Leadership Podcast. Are you ready to focus on amplifying your leadership superpowers? Let's go! Hello, my friends and fellow elite achievers. Welcome back to Modern Leadership. I hope that you are having a tremendous week. Our topic for today is creating high-performance workplaces. We've talked in the past about specialization in the workplace, that we as leaders and entrepreneurs must accept the responsibility of hiring the right people at the right time for the right roles. And the reality is that some people who get on our bus are only going to ride for a few stops before getting off, either voluntarily or in some cases involuntarily, and other people are going to get on. Today, I have invited two great guests to deep dive this conversation with us, Bob Dusin and Sue Bingham. Sue is the founder of HPWP Group, helping organizations create high-performance work environments through building trust. After years in aerospace, an industry notorious for controlling leadership styles, she recognized that her company's HR practices had evolved in response to the misbehavior of a few bad employees, resulting in lowered morale for the good employees. Bob is a partner at HPWP and spent the early part of his career in civil engineering and construction. He, along with Sue, are the co-authors of Creating the High Performance Workplace. It's not complicated to develop a culture of commitment. And today they are our modern leadership guest experts. Sue, Bob, so great to have you with us. How are you today?
Great. Thanks a lot, Jake.
Yeah, it's great to be with you.
This is going to be a lot of fun, and it's so good to have you. And Sue, before we jump into this, what by way of background did we miss in personal or hobbies, or what are you interested in?
Well, I think we left out that I like to run. I've run about 19 marathons, I think, but I've tapered off a little as I've gotten older.
And don't you think that running marathons is such a great metaphor to be used in leadership conversations?
It is perfect. It's amazing that you'd say that, because one of the phrases we use is relentless forward movement.
Big momentum, right? Once you get moving in the right direction, that momentum takes over.
Yes.
You know, one of the things that I often tell people, I do a lot of coaching, and I often tell people when they ask me what my job is, I tell them that I am the mid-marathon water station. You know, when you're running that marathon, you're around 15, 16, 18 miles, and you just want to give up, and then you come around the corner, and there's that like pillar of light from heaven, and the angels singing, and there's those power bars and water.
Jake, you sound like you're a runner too.
No, I only run from my couch to the refrigerator to get a Coke during the commercials, but my wife is a runner.
Okay.
All right, Bob, same question your way. What did we miss by way of intro?
Well, I want to say really quick, the distances Sue runs is amazing. I always tell her I don't even like to drive as far as she runs. So I always am amazed by what she's able to do with running marathons. One of the things that has really shaped my life and that has always been a big part of what I do is comedy and humor. I've done stand-up, and I studied at Second City Players Workshop doing comedy improvisation probably 25 to 30 years ago. So I've been doing professional improvisation all my life, which also translates very well into what I see going on in our workplaces today.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. And have you found that doing the improv and practicing in that arena has allowed you to be a better public speaker when you get out in front of groups?
You know what? If I hadn't gotten into improv, I used to be terrified to speak in front of groups or facilitate a class. Now I speak in front of groups of hundreds of people, and it doesn't even faze me. And it was improv and getting through that barrier of being up on stage and creating things in the moment and spontaneously that really got me to the point where I can do what I do now.
And he is so funny. I mean, if you can ever get him to do any of his impersonations, he's awesome.
I wish we could get you to do some right here on this podcast, and maybe as we get going, you'll be able to throw a few in, and we'll see if we can recognize them.
Or then maybe not. You never know.
This is a fascinating conversation. The authors of Creating the High Performance Workplace. And one of the things, Sue, that really intrigued me as I read through your bio, you have this background in aerospace and you were in this industry and you noticed that within your company, they started to create these rules, regulations, policies, whatever it may be, basically to, because of a couple of people and their misbehaviors, the rest of the industry or the rest of the people that you work with were facing some of the consequences of that. And my first thought was, airport security, right? I mean, we had a couple of misbehaviors and now every time we go through the check line, we have to take off our shoes. And so I wanted to ask you about this a little bit.
Well, I think those misbehaviors are really huge misbehaviors. But when you're talking about airport security, but I think that that unfortunately, an awful lot of companies still develop their human resource policies and practices around trying to catch that one bad apple. And then they are admonished, and I know as HR people, we admonish people to say, well, you've got to treat everybody the same. There can't be disparate treatment. But nobody's the same and no situation's the same. And so it's like we've asked our leaders to just give up on judgment and using compassion and understanding and probing for what's wrong and just give them sort of a manual of what it is they have to do. We encourage them not to think anymore. And I think that's still, unfortunately, it was 30 years ago in the aerospace company, and it was like that when we got there. But most companies today still have a lot of those policies.
It's interesting that you said that, and I'm glad that you kind of dove in this direction because as I was trying to anticipate where your answer was going to go, I thought you'd go in a different direction. But one of the things you said is we're encouraging our people not to think anymore. And I want to ask you, Bob, when we start to encourage our leadership, and particularly in this case, we're referring to HR, not to think, how do we balance this with creating policies and procedures within our company that allows the experience of the customer to be uniform throughout? For example, if I treat all of my employees the same way, the idea would be that they would treat all of our customers the same way, and regardless of who they get at the checkout counter or who they get on the customer service phone or which attorney they sit down with in our office, they would get the same service. How do we balance these two ideas?
That's a great question, Jake. And one thing I'll say there, the first thing I'll say is that we look at it as it's not about treating people the same. It's about treating people fairly. And those are two different things. My wife is a school counselor, and she counsels kindergarten through fifth grade. And one of the sayings that she's had on her bulletin board for years is that fair is not treating people the same. Fair is giving everyone what they need to be successful. So the idea is that the rules and policies, as Sue mentioned, it creates a check the box type of management. It becomes more management than leadership. If I've done this, if I've treated these people all exactly the same, then everything's great. And we can't treat people the same because people aren't the same. It's almost impossible. Everybody, no one's equal to each other. We're all different, and it's impossible to treat unequal things equally. So we have to actually lead people, and that's why we stress moving forward leaders and managers getting to know their people, because not everybody needs the same thing in order to be successful.
Jake, I was just going to say, I think maybe one of the differences we're talking about here is the difference between process and policy. Yes, there should be, expected processes that people follow that are best practices and so on. But when it comes to individual people and what will make them successful, that's got to be an individual kind of thing. And if you've got a problem or an issue with someone, our leaders, the choice is the leaders can either turn to the policy manual and say, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is the policy. I'm supposed to give a written warning, or I'm supposed to do this. Or they can go talk to that person who, by the way, is most likely an adult and say, tell me what's going on, and do some problem solving. That's the difference. And when I say we're not encouraging our leaders to think and use judgment, the more restrictive our policies are, and the more we force our leaders to follow them, the more we turn people into feeling like numbers.
And I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. There's a buzzword going out in the industries today called micromanagement. And I know that as we have more and more millennials in the workplace, and this has become quite a hot topic, that people feel like they're being micromanaged or they're being, scrutinized down to every little decision that they make. And I think what you're talking about in creating a high performance workplace is not micromanagement. And yet there's this feeling that there is micromanagement happening. So how do you respond to that?
Micromanagement is a really good example of the kind of environment where we're not trusting people, we're not expecting them to perform well. What's the recent phrase I've heard? Check but verify. That's like micromanagement. The whole issue for me, the foundation is that there's a lack of trust and positive assumptions about people. Now, really, we have positive assumptions generally, we think, but if we've had some bad experiences, we tend to sort of label the whole workforce with those, and we want to protect the company against those bad apples. So we start treating everybody like they might be a problem. That's, I guess, what I'm getting at.
Yeah, what that's created is this feeling where leaders are becoming more and more managers, where they're just taskmasters, where they're checking boxes and just making sure that the rank and file are doing what they're told to do, as opposed to leading people and allowing the people that they lead to step up and assume the roles that you hired them to. One of the topics that we've talked a lot about on the podcast, and Bob, I'd love to get your input on this, and that is this idea that because we are so busy and because we're creating, kind of these policies and procedures that we follow, what's being eliminated is this still time, or this time to really think and meditate and really discover creative solutions to the problems. And I think that's kind of what Sue was talking about, is it not?
Yeah, it absolutely is. The more we inundate people with the policies that we have. The thing is, Jake, most people in our organization wouldn't do anything that goes against the policies that we have in these 3-inch, 5-inch thick policy manuals. Most people want to do the right things, but when we create these policies, it's done to try to control the small amount of people who might break a rule or break a policy, but it stifles the majority of people who want to and do have the ability to be creative, because they're not given that flexibility. Because when a manager, you brought up micromanaging, when a leader or manager thinks that he or she has to manage and look over the shoulder of their people, they're doing it because essentially what Sue said, they don't trust that if they don't look over their shoulder, they don't trust that the work will get done or get done correctly. And what ends up happening is you're looking over the shoulders of a vast majority of people who are fully capable of being creative and doing all those great things that you would expect them to be able to do. And it stifles them. It stifles the whole workplace. We think it controls that small fractional percentage, but it stifles the entire workplace.
What about this idea that, and one of the things that you said, and kind of your answer is prefaced on the fact that, we have to trust the people that we bring onto our teams, that they're able to get the job done. But one of the things I'd love to ask you about is this idea that oftentimes within companies, particularly fast-growing companies, we often promote our people faster than they are ready. In fact, we often promote our people to the highest level of incompetence that we can. For example, somebody's great at sales, so we make them a manager over the sales team. And that doesn't necessarily translate to them having the skills to do it. And so how do we respond to this fast-growing companies that often promote people that aren't quite ready for that promotion?
Don't promote them. Don't develop them first. I mean, if you're a fast-growing company, and we just talked with one that are just in a hyper-growth mode, and one of the things we talked with them about is you need to be looking right now, or what are the career paths, what are the developmental things you need to be doing, that leaders, by definition, by job description, should be developing and mentoring people, the people that report to them. So when we ask them, how much of your time do you spend on administrative and technical tasks, they're spending an awful lot of time in the day-to-day run. And these are senior leaders in a fast growth company because, everything's urgent and everything's a priority and everything's happening fast, which is very understandable. However, you're going to be on that hamster wheel forever if you don't start pushing some of the responsibility down and trusting the folks who are responsible for the day-to-day, and then spend your time developing those people so that you can promote them and so that you do have bench strength. So it's really the answer to that is that senior leaders need to make the conscious decision that a big part of their role is developing people.
And I think you're spot on with that response that we as leaders need to be developing our people. But I also want to ask you to go a little bit deeper in this and follow this up with a question that sometimes in a fast growth environment, we need people today. And our options are either promote from within or bring in outside people. And each one has pros and cons, right? If we promote from within, we may promote before they're ready. And if we bring in outside, we could change the culture within our company. So as you talk about that one specific example that you're dealing with currently of a very high growth, fast paced company, how do you encourage them? Obviously, they want to create a developmental process that's going to be good for them in the long run. But what do they do in the short run?
What we encourage them to do is to hire for attributes. I mean, to the extent that there's a need to have specific technical knowledge or experience, that's important. And what often gets overlooked is, are these folks quick learners? Are they really open? Are they trustworthy? Are they people that can that are committed versus just walking through the day? And I think you can determine a number of those attributes through group interviews, especially by peers. That's one of the best ways to do it because peers will make tougher decisions about who gets hired than often the managers are because the managers are panicked. And the peers are willing to pick up and work extra hard rather than hire someone that's just going to turn over.
This is absolutely, I think, a very important topic that you just brought up, and I want to make sure that our listeners are paying attention to this, and that is hiring for attributes, because skills and the ability to do the actual work can be trained. And I think a lot of times in these fast-paced environments, I work with a lot of lawyers in the companies that I work with, and one of the challenges that they have and one of the mistakes that they're making is they hire for, these technical skills that they have, and they don't focus on what we would call the softer side or the attributes. And so, Bob, as I dive into this a little bit more, you guys decided to write a book, Creating the High Performance Workplace. Why now? Why decide to write this book, and how does it play into this conversation that we're having?
Well, the book's been a long time coming. Sue and her husband, Ken, have been creating and developing the HPWP philosophy for decades. Sue's husband, Ken, began back in the late 70s and early 80s researching successful companies and finding out what are the common elements of their culture that makes them so high performing. So the book is coming about as a culmination and a result of decades of research and development by Sue's husband Ken and by Sue, and we've created this group that now we advocate what can really be done, because it's become so obvious to us. And I think before I joined up with HPWP years ago, it was obvious to Sue and Ken that this is the approach companies need to have, but so few companies are using this approach. So we made the decision a couple of years ago that we need to put this in a format that makes sense. As we say on the title, it's not complicated. It's pretty straightforward, and we know that the culture works, and that it doesn't make just a great place to come to work. It changes the bottom line for organizations.
And it probably goes without saying that HPWP stands for high performing workplace. And so this is something that Sue and her husband have been doing for years. Bob, you've joined and now continue to carry the mantle of this. And one of the things I want to ask you about is the words that you chose on this title, right? So we're talking about creating as part of a high performance workplace, and we're talking about developing a culture of commitment. And so how about the choice of the words creating and development within the title of this book?
Yeah, because it is something you create. You create it. The word create, I thought was appropriate to use here because it is up to leaders to make that choice. Leaders have a choice: continue to lead in a traditional way or create something new. And so that's where that came from. And the idea that it's not complicated, it's really the elements, the 8 elements of a high performance workplace are fairly simple. I compared it to, people talk all the time about things they want to change in their life. And if it's say it's losing weight, well, the idea is pretty simple. It's eat less, exercise more. But we all have a difficult time doing that. And it's the same way with the high performance workplace. The elements aren't complicated at all. It's that leaders are so ingrained in their traditional styles of management, it is really difficult unless they have a roadmap for them to see a way to get beyond how they're doing it. So many leaders we deal with that are very traditional really feel that there's no other way to lead.
Yeah, and once you start, like we talked about, like as we started this podcast, that the momentum, once we start in that direction and get moving, well, then that momentum will carry us. And so as leaders, it's important that we identify the foundational stepping stones, the blocks that get us started, and really start moving in that direction. I love the choice of the word develop because it implies that this is something any organization, and we have a lot of listeners out there that are running small, medium, and even some large-sized companies. And as they look at their company, that empowerment of knowing that this is something that is developable and that there really is no destination. There's a journey. This is a process that we continually work on within our company. The culture that we are creating is something that we strive for, and we continue to make adjustments all the way through. And Sue, I want us to jump more into this book, but alas, we don't have a whole lot of time. So I want to just target on one question for you, and that is, help us understand this 5% principle and how it applies to this high-performing work environment.
It's based on the belief that the vast majority of people, and we just labeled that 95%, the vast majority of people are good, worthwhile people. They own homes, they raise kids, they go to church, they pay taxes, they go to work, they strive to do their best. That's the vast majority of people. There's a group that's not, and we've very cleverly called them the 5%ers. And what we've said about the 5%ers is this isn't someone that's not performing well, or it's not someone that's having a problem. A 5%er is someone that we define them as someone who does not have good motives. They want to do as little as possible and get away with as much as possible. They're not a team player and they can't be trusted. And every organization, they can slip in. 5%ers aren't stupid. They can slip into an organization. A good example of that is companies in trying to eliminate 5%ers or prevent them will have a 90-day probationary period. And, a 5%er can count to 90. And day 91, he's out sick. So there's the 5%ers are, you don't want to hire them. And if you hire them, you want to get them out of your organization as fast as you can.
Yeah, and we started out talking about that, right? I mean, people are going to get on your bus. They're going to go with you for a couple of stops. Some people will go on this ride with you, this journey of entrepreneurship and business leadership with you for a long time. But others are only going to be on for a stop or two. And it's your responsibility as a leader, whether it's voluntarily or involuntarily, to make sure you have the right people on the bus sitting in the right seats. And, one thing that came to my mind as you talked about that, Sue, is that sometimes these 5%ers, they're the sprinters in our marathon of the workplace. They come out and they can run down the block really quickly. But when they turn that first corner, are they able to continue to run that marathon with you? And if not, it's important to identify them early and quickly and to save yourself a whole bunch of headaches going down the path. So this is a great conversation. I really wish we could continue on it, but alas, we only have a few minutes left in the podcast. And so I would love to switch to my favorite topic, and that is learning from leaders, to add a little personal with this business conversation that we're having. Are you guys ready for learning from leaders?
Sure.
Okay.
All right. So the first question, I'll direct this one at Bob. What is the book currently on your Kindle or bedside table? What are you reading these days?
I tell you, one book I started reading late this summer, and I started it because several leaders, at least 3 different leaders, I found myself talking with them in their office and saw it on their bookshelf, is a book called Team of Teams by Stanley McChrystal, who was a general in Iraq, and he's now retired. But Team of Teams talks about what he learned from the type of conflict he was fighting, and how he got to a point where we thought his troops and our side thought that we had the advantage because we were more efficient. The other side was winning because they were more adaptable. And so he started into the book talking about the difference between things being complicated and things being complex. And they found out quickly that the conflicts they were getting into were more complex than they were just complicated. So it's all about how do teams become more adaptable and not just worry about how they can become efficient.
And as you said, the word adaptability, smiles went across the audience of the Modern Leadership Podcast, because adaptability is one of the 5 leadership superpowers that we identify through the Leadership Superpower Assessment on the website. So adaptability, and by the way, I will share adaptability is my superpower as I took the assessment. So very happy to hear that. And what a great idea, this look at efficiency versus adaptability in leadership positions. So a great book. Sue, I'm going to send the next question your way, and that is, what is your leadership superpower?
Well, I didn't, and I'm so sorry, Jake. I didn't take the assessment, so I knew the question was there, and I asked my husband, who I've been with for 30-some years, and I thought he would be able to answer that better than anyone. And he felt it was, and maybe this fits with adaptability, but it had to do with openness, being very accepting and open to whatever's happening. And being able to trust people and that who they are and what they want to do is going to be the right thing.
And how does this openness, does this play into delegation for you at all?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I think if you take the openness to the next level, which is trust, that absolutely the people that I work with are part of our team. I trust completely. We're all remote. And it's never even occurred to me to check a credit card statement. We're just, it's just very trusting, and we're all dedicated to making a difference.
And this is such a great superpower. You know, one of the things that I see as I look at the businesses that I work with is this roadblock that happens because the leader is unwilling or unable to delegate and trust that their team's going to get it done. And therefore, the leader then just becomes this blockade of efficiency that work cannot continue until the leader gets out of the way. And so I think this is such a great superpower. Thank you for sharing it. Bob, coming back your way, how about a leadership philosophy quote or mantra or something that you live by?
Sure. And I do want to say I'm glad to hear Sue's not checking credit card statements. I feel like Sue's husband is getting as much airtime as Sue and I are here. But one of the quotes that I've always loved comes from Ken Bingham. As far as I know, it comes from Ken. And that is, when we talk to our our clients and workshop participants, we use this phrase, but it's treat people like a neighbor that you like. And I always make sure to put the last part on there, because I've seen some neighbors that maybe you don't want to treat people that way. But I think it's not about treating people, do unto others. It's just do the right thing. Treat people in the right way. Whether it's the way you want to be treated or not, do what's right. And I think people in the workplace can always use a little bit of that philosophy and think about that when it comes to the little things in the workplace that get in our way, that create relationship problems that last for years, and it could be over some little thing. So I always think about just treating everybody like they'd be a neighbor that you like, and things will work out pretty well.
What a great philosophy to live by, and thank you for sharing it. Sue, our last question directed at you is the book that you most often gift to friends, family, or colleagues.
The book that I most often gift is a children's book. It's Goodnight Moon, and there's another one that I always gift, which is I'll Love You Forever. And those are two children's books that as soon as I hear that someone I know is having a child, those are the first two books I get for them. So not a business book. And by the way, if I can add just one more thing, Ken, as you can tell, has had such a profound influence on us. One of his other things that he always says that we try to live by is doing the right thing is always the right thing.
Yeah, and I don't know that there's much that can be added to that, Sue. Do the right thing. Doing the right thing is always the right thing. And I appreciate you sharing a couple of children's books. As we mentioned in the pre-interview, it's a lot of fun to see what people are gifting. We've done over 220 episodes. We've had a lot of business books on the table. Goodnight Moon is the first time. This is a first-time recommendation for us, or most gifted. So thank you.
Well, thanks for humoring me.
Wonderful. Now, before I let you guys go, any last bit of advice, and then how can we find out more about you, the book, and connect with the High Performance Workplace Company?
Yeah, I'll just give you a brief bit on how you can contact the company. We're at HPWPgroup.com. And our book, again, is Creating the High Performance Workplace.
Yeah, and Sue, last word?
It's really been our longtime vision that people will get as much opportunity to thrive where they work as they do in their personal life. And we're passionate about helping leaders create that environment where people can do that.
Well, we spend a lot of time at work. I mean, a lot of hours in the day and a lot of hours in the week are spent working. And it's so important that not only do we have an enjoyable place to work, but we have a high-performing workplace. It has an energy and a acceleration that is unmatched. And so we really appreciate you coming on, being guest experts, and leaving us with your knowledge and expertise on how we can create high-performance workplaces within the environments that we work. So thank you.
Hey,
Thank you, Jake.
Jake, you made it easy. Thank you.
All right, my friends, and a big thank you to Bob Dusin and Sue Bingham to coming on the show and talking about high-performing workplaces. All of us work in work environments, right? I mean, we have to work with people. And so isn't it great to have this sit down and talk about how we can create more efficiency within our work? A couple of key takeaways that I had from this episode. You got to give people what they need to be successful. It's impossible to treat unequal things equal. Everybody's different. And so if you start creating these policies, which you know me, I'm a big believer in policies and creating, efficiencies within your workforce, but make sure you're not stifling the growth of your team by implementing procedures and policies that are just designed for one person. Pull that one person aside, work with them. Of course, everything that we talked about in this episode of the podcast can be found at jakeacarlson.com/ML106 for episode 106. And until next week, I want to wish you the very best of days, an even better life. Create a high-performing workplace and stay awesome. Thanks Thanks for listening to the Modern Leadership Podcast. You can find me on Facebook at Speaker Jake, on Twitter at Jake A. Carlson, and of course the website, jakeacarlson.com. See you there.